All
All
right.
right. So we read two chapters, both the Salt Lake chapters. So it spanned from, let's see, May of 1853 to, was it June of 1856, I believe,
Yep.
with the two chapters. So here we have some interesting first milestones in Phineas's life. He marries Amanda Polly Savage and Catherine McCleve, and he works on several houses for Brigham Young, including the Beehive House and the Lion House. He was the water master. And then we get the end where he decides to leave Salt Lake. So lots of different things, yeah, happen in in these two chapters. So anyway, lots of different places we can start. But anybody have anything particular that like stood out to them that they want to discuss or bring up or say anything about?
I have a thought about Phineas that I'd like your opinion on. And as you read, keep just think about this. Now, my son is autistic, and autism is much more understood in this world today. Just the thinking a little different. Of course, it has a whole range. Different people have different behaviors and different things. I just can't help thinking that Phineas was on that spectrum. And I kept thinking these chapters, either that or he just wasn't a very good businessman. Like these chapters, and before too, he's constantly a little bit befuddled by people. Do you get
Mhm.
that feeling like he's just like, and I love this chapter. First of all, the filth, the water filth is hilarious. And Allison and I, if you guys aren't on, watch our social media posts. Allison and I are doing these. I've been working, and I just foresee some really great AI pictures out of these in the future. But where he's water master, he's got to tell these people to, they're causing all this filth and all this. But the ones where, now I'm going to forget the names. But the one guy says to him, "Are you going to be a water master?" He's like, "Well, I'm trying to do." No, are you going to be a waterman? Well, I'm trying. No, are you going to do your job? He finally says yes. Instead of his response before was, "I'm going to try to keep everybody happy." And he's such a pleaser that I could
Mhm.
see this guy, stop pleasing. Are you going to do your job? So, yeah. So he goes and then, maybe it's the way he's written it too, but he goes and does his job. And
Mhm.
they're like, "What? You're fining me for?" Like,
What the heck?
do my job or not? He seems just a little, either he was the kind of guy that just couldn't like and be okay with people being mad at him. He couldn't have been a cop, you know, but he just like, no, this is what you have to do. And he lets people push him around a little bit. And in the end, he always seems a little befuddled by them and just like, I'm trying, you're just, so I just wonder if he's a little bit on the autism spectrum where he just can't get other people's way of thinking or put up with not being liked. The like, you're mad at me. And hey,
Mhm.
that's okay. I'm doing my job. And, just that like blunt in your face personality. He wasn't that. He wanted to always get along, but he just didn't quite know how. To me, that's kind of an autistic personality that wants to be a part of things, but they're so socially awkward that other people are like, eh. And so they're trying, and and then he said a few times, he acted cool toward me after that. Even Brigham and this,
Mhm.
um, anyway, a bunch of people, they act cool toward me. And I wonder if it's just that awkward guy who's there acting awkward, and then you're just like, you know what? I'm not, I'll just I can't like handle this guy anymore. And they just kind of keep their
Mhm.
distance a little because he's a little different. I just wonder if that's our Phineas. I don't know. What do you
No,
guys?
yeah. It was really interesting. I really enjoyed reading this first chapter, kind of about all his little problems that he has to deal with, whether it's building the house and who's the foreman, well, I'm in charge, well, who put you in charge, sort of deal, or this water master thing. And one thing that I see over and over again throughout this book with Phineas is that he has and a lot better than I probably would at the time or that I even do now. Just an ability just to let things slide. Like reading on page 105 talking about I couldn't tell if this was Brother Kimball or President Young talking to him, but kind of about like this water issue. You're making the schedule. Well, why do I have to follow the schedule? Because you told me to do my job. Well, that shouldn't apply to me, but you told, all this sort of stuff. And people are telling him to do his job and then he does. And they're like, wait, whoa, but I don't, whoa, I should be above this. Anyway, it
Yeah.
was very interesting towards the end. Um, I'm looking at like the third to last paragraph. Monday after he sent for me and asked why he could not have more water. I told him I intended he should have as much as he wanted. He answered, "You've ruined my potatoes." For want of water. And he held up a vine in his hand, and my fruit trees have spoiled. My garden is worth a great deal more than many others. I must have water. Um, and then they kind of go back and forth, back and forth. And then the last paragraph, I said I had no desire to take anything from him, but was striving to do what was right. Then he left the room, but I knew what was the matter with his potatoes. His ground had been trenched about 2 feet deep and all the small stones taken out. The ground was very light and consequently very dry. As as I before stated, his gardener was not willing to use a large stream on his crop, and his crop had not been thoroughly watered throughout the season. But I did not tell him it was the fault of the gardener, for he was an old man and needed his employ. So I chose to bear it, then expose him. How kind, but also if I was Phineas and this guy was harping on me because I ruined his potatoes because I'm trying to do my job correctly, excuse me, it's actually your gardener's fault. If he wasn't this old guy, he would have known not to do this and this and this, whatever it was, because Phineas obviously knew what the problem was and he wasn't a gardener. But he's like, you know what? This gardener needs a job and I'll just kind of let this roll off me. He can yell at me for not having enough water when in reality, it's 100% not my fault. It's not the fault that he didn't have enough water. And I noticed this is a recurring trend, I feel like, throughout the books, whether it's, you know what, this guy who was yelling at me, make him the foreman, make him my boss. That's fine. And when Brigham was like, are you sure? Because it seems like you guys have something going on. He's like, you know what? If the job gets done faster, I don't care. I don't care about any personal quabbles. I just want things to be done, kind of lets these kind of personal attacks on him in a way just kind of roll off and like, you know what? I'll save the peace, not worth the fight. I'll just let this go. And so
That
it's just very
episode,
interesting.
that episode with the building and, make him the foreman, because that goes against my theory that he was autistic, because that is a very, like, he really planned and he saw a few, okay, if I say he's my boss now, he's going to get off my case and then I can do my work. And then that was a very planned out thing.
If he wants to be in charge, how about we just make him in charge?
Yeah. And we know that he'll then do better and I can do what I'm doing. Yeah, that goes against my theory that he couldn't navigate. Other things are more like the gardener. Maybe he just, and I see this with my son who just struggles to like put things into words and explain himself. And then sometimes he just doesn't. So maybe it's sort of like, okay, I know why your thing's not getting watered. It's because you're a gardener, but he also needs a job. But also, I'm doing my job. You can't have all the water you want. And I just can't put that all into words. So I'm just not going to.
So whatever. Yeah.
I could kind of see that just being like, I can't even begin and it'll come out like, well, and then you'll chop my head off anyway. And so I'm just gonna, I don't know. That's what I'm thinking about Phineas right now.
Yeah. And it was very interesting reading this irrigation. And I'm so bummed because I found a really cool YouTube video that I was going to show that kind of explains this, like the early Salt Lake irrigation and how they use, like, there's a picture on page 35, the very first page of the chapter, that kind of shows these water logs and how they were like one of the first cities in America to use. And I found a really cool video explaining that this past week. And then I pulled it up today and it has been taken down. And I don't know where it is, but I'll find it and maybe we'll put it in the newsletter or I'll post it on the social medias or something. Because it was really cool and interesting, kind of hearing about how this worked, why this worked, how can water pipes work.
I
And
know
kind
the
of
whole
how,
thing boggles my mind.
yeah, and like kind of what the role of a water master was, because, nowadays it's very different, obviously, but how, and Phineas kind of talks about it a little bit, how he made these irrigations and pipes that would deliver fresh water to people's houses, but also how he was like, you know what, I gotta implement this schedule. And then people got in an uproar about that. And well, these ladies are dumping their dirty laundry water in the creek and polluting everything. Okay, well, let me go talk to this person. Oh, well, if I can drink my own filth, why can't other people? What's the big problem? Like, just all this stuff that he had to deal with. I can't believe he was sane, because just reading about this, I'm like, you know, pounding my head against the wall. Well, what's wrong with running the water through my pig den? Just if I built I think I can't remember who he was talking to about, hey, you need to not have your water run through the pigs or move the pigs or whatever. He's like, well, if I built a wall big enough where no one could see the pigs, no one would complain. But they can see the pigs, so they're gonna complain. So there's not really an issue. He says like, but there is a little bit. Anyway, it was just very interesting to read, and I'll try to find the same video or a different one or something and post it. But it was really cool, kind of seeing hearing how it all worked, because it seems very complicated, and it's very interesting because I mean, growing up and learning about the early pioneers and how they all moved out west and then they settled in Utah and lived happily ever after, but there were big problems. There were you had to deal with this irrigation. There's not enough water. We can't do what's typically been done in the East because this is a desert. Oh, and there's also Indians, trying to kill us. And, instead of being called to serve in the nursery, I'm called to go settle a territory in Utah. And, all these really complicated things. And it's it's easy to think, and I guess at least me personally, I've traditionally thought, oh, all the pioneers worked together and were so friendly towards each other all the time, and there was no problems because they were in Zion and everything was. But no, there was people dealing with, I want more water than him. Well, how come he gets to be the foreman? That's not fair. They still had their personal their quabbles and didn't necessarily work in perfect harmony together, like like I at least traditionally thought that, oh, once they got to Utah everything was hunky-dory and they only had to deal with the federal government. But anyway, I'm on a rant, but it was just very interesting reading about that. It kind of humanizes the pioneers a little bit, that no, I mean, yes, they're saints and working together in a very general sense for the betterment of Zion, but also, how come he gets this and I don't? Well, how come? And even when Phineas was talking to Brigham, hey, so thanks for giving me that job. It's not actually enough. You didn't pay me enough for my family. I don't know if he wanted this ox and yoke or if he wanted to use it for his farm or whatever. And Brigham sat him down and said, no, but if you want to come work, I think it was the next season or whatever, for these buildings, you can. And he's like, oh, but I need to feed my family today. Anyway, so just these it kind of humanizes them a little bit.
I was confused about that part because he didn't give him the ox. He went in and said, can I have the ox? Because I'm not making enough to feed my family. I'm trying. He was trying. He didn't leave with an ox. In fact, he left, it sounds like, fired. Like he went home and told his wives,
Yeah.
Now what are we going to do? So it seemed like it was, and what it was interesting to me that he said, Brigham, you told me, he thought he was doing what Brigham said. And this is where I think this is the little autism brain, I'm afraid. Brigham's like, all right, I know I said that, but what I meant was do that, but you gotta also like feed your family, Phineas. Like, I know I said this general rule, and Phineas was like, oh, I will obey that to that's the like rigid autism list a little bit.
Yeah.
That rather than Brigham's like, okay, I said that and I meant that, but what I also meant was you can't just lie down and die. So then he was telling him, and Phineas said to the next person, well, he said to work by the job and not by the hour. Because he said, well, how much will no, I want, so he seemed to want a job then, like work under somebody. I don't know if I got that right. And then the people were like, no, just fix my doorknob or whatever, and I'll pay you. And he's like, oh, I'm supposed to be getting, maybe Brigham was telling him, go work for somebody else because you aren't thinking right yourself. Like you're not able to figure this out, how much I need to make. But he also
Mhm.
suggested he go into business with somebody. Like, but to me,
Mhm.
this was saying, look, you're such a good worker, but you're not a very good business. You don't have the money, you don't have the capital. So get together with someone who's got capital and you've got the, how know-how. Go into business, then you can people and you get this business going. But Phineas was not a good business, like starting a whole corporation sort of business. I don't think he was good at his thing, but I don't think
Mhm.
he was like making a business out of this. And he seems to like, well, I don't know how to do that. And I don't know if this is necessarily autism. I don't think I'd be good at this either. In fact, I started a business and I'm not good at it. This little music business I have going on. And I've seen that I'm not good at like networking and making connections and then getting people to work under me and I'm more like a all by myself sort of worker. So I wonder if he's like that.
Mhm.
Like he couldn't figure out how to go into business with somebody and
Mhm.
get a job with somebody. So he's a by yourself guy, and they just don't make a lot of money. Anyway, did you guys think there was more there that I couldn't quite figure out? He was fired from Brigham's houses then, I guess. But yet Brigham told, well, I'm gonna be building a house on the island. So there's gonna be work if you
Mhm.
in with a partner and like bid on it, or if you get in with a company. I didn't quite know
But
what he's selling in there.
but later he said, Brigham said, well, you left me. He
Yeah.
blamed Phineas for not staying with him.
So is
So,
that Phineas like,
But you
well,
told me.
I was fired? Tim's like, I didn't fire you. Is there like a disconnect here?
well, I
It,
wonder, everybody actually took Brigham Young, whatever Brigham Young said came from God and you just obeyed. I mean, not everybody, but people that were devout did. And Phineas was
Mhm.
like that. Whatever Brigham said was from God to him. And and we know that prophets don't always act as prophets, they act as people
Mhm.
too. They're not perfect. And he may have said something like that, but not really meant it.
Or
I mean,
meant it in a general sense, but you got to figure out how to implement it logically so you still live.
yeah,
And
yeah, he struggled his whole
Yeah.
life. Well, almost his whole life.
yeah, really.
Yeah,
I'm
it
sorry, I
was.
have to bow out, but I enjoy this. We'll talk
Thank you.
next time.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very interesting reading that along those same lines. I'm on page 108 if anybody is wondering. But he's kind of talking with Brigham, and after he talks, he says, "When we parted, oh wait, where am I? Yeah, when we parted, he went into his office, and I went home with a heavy heart, not knowing what or how to do. It seemed as though I could never think of leaving him, but his word had gone forth to me, and I felt my salvation depended upon it, and I
Mhm.
must do it." And so he did kind of feel like, well, Brigham told me this is what I need to do. So I guess I'm going to do it now, even though it's not going to feed my family today, which I need. And then he went and told Aunt Eliza, and anyway, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. And I'm
Very
not sure
interesting.
Brigham is saying everything, telling him your salvation depends on.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's
Doubt
tweaking
it.
a little bit, like
You
kind of
want
like,
some advice? I'll give you some business
yeah.
advice.
And I could see a leader of this community with thousands of people here
Mhm.
saying, okay, people, we can't all be out for ourselves, or some people are going to die, just can't make it. So
Mhm.
some of you, we can't have you all farming. So we've got to have some of you coming in to do the trades, like sacrifice in some ways for the good of the community. And I
Mhm.
think that's why he gave him that general direction to Phineas, don't get a farm of your own. You need to come build houses so people can have houses, so we can have stores, you need to sacrifice something for the good of the community. But yet, if everybody does that, then we aren't farming potatoes either, so we can't
Mhm.
kind of got to be, we all need to give a little, but my gosh, don't kill yourself literally for this. Your family's still got to live. And Phineas seemed to be taking, I don't know if it's too literally, or he just wasn't a good businessman, or it could be that he's just writing out things that we all think and we just don't say, and he's writing it
Yeah.
all out, which impresses me that he's remembering all these details because he's not writing this at the time. But just that, like, well, and we could say this about our little, I was at the PTA, and then the president told me that I really should be helping class 1, but I was helping class 2. And then she got all mad that maybe he's just writing down everything.
Yeah.
Maybe it's just understandable dynamics.
Mm-hmm.
Well, also he said to Brigham Young, he says everything. He says, "I just feel like what you tell me to do is law," and
Mhm.
that was the thing. He didn't give, like Nan said, the opportunity for him to be human. It was like he's a prophet and whatever he says is law. But you know what? Brigham Young was a hard man. I mean, he had to be able to get all these people settled and surviving in Utah. He had to be kind of a hard man. But I kind of get the impression maybe he wanted Phineas to learn to stand up for himself a little bit, and Phineas didn't do it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Like, Phineas, I was hoping you'd figure this out, but since you haven't, go do a different direction. Yeah, I kind of wonder that too. And was it Kimball or Grant who tells them, like, are you going to do your job? Like, I want you to stand up, be a man, stand for something, be tough. When he's always like, but I just think sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah, interesting.
Very
Well,
interesting.
and I have another thing I'd like you to help me parse. And this, I really do wonder how this was phrased because I went back, I was doing this with Allison back on page 99 when he mentions being married to his plural wives.
Mhm.
Very interesting story of Amanda Polly there who
Yeah.
had a hard time with it and then came back. There's a couple things I like there because from what I've heard, of course, there's pressure. This was going on and so there's pressure to join it and to have multiple wives. But there was also but if this isn't working out for you,
You
most
may leave.
divorce laws in the country, only women, men could not ask for a divorce, but women could very liberally. So I think he exemplified that by telling her, well, I really hope you do this, but in the end, okay, you decide. But here's the question I wonder, page 99,
Mm-hmm.
that his original was not punctuated. So Janet has punctuated this one way, and I wonder about this.
Hmm.
Let me see, where is it? Where does he say it was the beginning of all my troubles? Okay, the top of the page. This I call an eventful year of my life, and I may say it was the beginning of all my sorrows before I took these 2 wives, notwithstanding I was converted to the doctrine. There was something lacking on my part as to testimony. So if you took out the period after sorrows,
After sorrows. Oh.
he didn't put any of this punctuation in. Then I thought, because what I wondered was he's saying this is an eventful year of my life, maybe period. And I may say it was the beginning of all my sorrows before I took these 2 wives. The way it's punctuated, she makes it sound like these wives, plural marriage, beginning of all my sorrows. And there's a book by Brittany Chapman Nash, published by Deseret Book, called Let's Talk About Polygamy. And she quotes Phineas in that book. And it's sort of like, guys, plural marriage was no picnic. And he quotes him like, this was the beginning of all my sorrows. And that totally works for that thesis. But I'm not sure that's what he was saying. He's been saying this point was the beginning before I took these 2 wives.
I don't know, because then he says, but notwithstanding, I was
Yeah.
converted to the doctrine of plurality. So even though it was hard, I was converted. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think in that way it works.
But what if there's no period of sorrows? What if he says, but there is a period after 2 wives? So I may say it was the beginning of all my sorrows before I took these 2 wives, period. Notwithstanding, I was converted to the doctrine of plurality. There was something lacking on my part as to testimony. I felt it as an important step. I asked the Lord to enlighten my mind. The answer I received, I do not write, for it has not been taught. That's really interesting. So he definitely, he had a quandary about plural marriage and got an answer and took it to the Lord and got an answer. I think that is such a fabulous example of take your questions to God. But I just wonder if he was saying the plural wives was the beginning of all the sorrows, or just that time period. It was
That's
the
true.
beginning of all my sorrows. And then I took two wives and it worked
And then it was great.
all time. But I'm not certain he was saying it was the wives that made it the time of sorrow.
Hmm.
That
Yeah, the way it's punctuated now too doesn't necessarily mean that my sorrow started when it's just saying this year and marriage. I mean, that was a big thing that happened this year, so it could be saying that, but also like moving to Salt Lake and starting these new jobs. That's when he looks like he probably went to like a lot of financial, hardship and stuff. So it might have just been like this is one thing that happened this year, but in the eventful year, it was, the beginning to all my sorrows. It might not have necessarily like even the way it's punctuated right now.
Mhm.
Um,
That's true. It still kind of
yeah.
sounds like this year rather than the plural wives being the sorrow. But before this, he was in Manti. He was building a mill, which he was very good at, and he's going to make a lot of money at later in Swan Creek. So, and he could farm, which I think he must have had some land there. I don't know for sure. But this could have been a hardship to come to Salt Lake, have to all these, interpersonal interactions that he's not
People.
very good at. Yeah. Working under people or over people, or that might have been just not his thing. And after this, he's going to go to Goshen, and there's all these, that whole book we wrote about the Goshen time, all those interpersonal things. And then after that, he goes back to farming and milling, which was his thing. So this might have just been a time in his life. I hate to blame the wives for it. Maybe I'm just don't blame these poor girls for
I
all
don't
your.
think it's the wife's fault at all. I think it's just the circumstance
The
that,
circumstance,
look,
yeah.
marriage already is hard, and then he's doing it 4 times. And so it's
And you're
not at all like, and the wife, like, I was like reading about these 17-year-old wives, and obviously they both, like, we know Catherine gets divorced. Amanda Polly has a very hard time with it at the beginning. Like, I feel bad for them, but I don't blame it on Phineas. I just think it's kind of a really hard situation. They're young, they're not just married, but a plural marriage. They have, they're settling a new area, financial struggles. It's just hard, probably hard, like emotionally and everything. I don't think it's anybody's fault. It's
Mhm.
just a hard situation for
Well, and they
everyone.
were starving for half or more than half of the time. They were starving.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like hand to mouth. And one place he says all my pay was taken up in flour and firewood. But when he was talking about I'm taking my firewood home, like that's it. He had money enough to buy a house. So he bought a $200 house and then firewood and flour. And I know at one point, somewhere in there, they talked about, well, we ate the potatoes through the winter. Like that's it. No wonder they're sick all the time and they're drinking this water that the pigs have. No wonder they're sick all the time.
Yeah. It's intense. Very intense.
Yeah.
The crickets and
I also
the
really
stress.
that part right after where he says, I don't write about this. Then he has this dream about the resurrection that was really lovely. That he felt like we're not just going to be, poof, you're resurrected. Hey, perfect body. I'm good to go. But there's this progression of I overcome my ailments. I'm still walking cripple. Oh, now I can. Oh, no. I think that's a really interesting idea.
Hmm.
And yeah, he definitely took it as a revelation.
Well, as someone who's lost a child in an accident, I hope that's not quite right. I hope they're resurrected completely well and whole. And from the Book of Mormon, I get the answer that they are resurrected completely well and whole.
Hmm.
So I'm not sure. That kind of made me wonder about that part, but it might have been symbolic or
Yeah.
something else. I
Yeah.
don't
One
doubt that he had the dream.
one thing that I think is really interesting that Phineas writes this down, and he also writes down lots of other revelations and miracles that happened in his life, is that yes, it's cool for us to read it now, like, wow, this was my ancestor, and he had this really cool experience, and even reading about the early saints, Brigham Young, Joseph Smith, the revelations and things that they learned, that at least with Phineas, I feel like that this was personal for Phineas. This was a revelation that Phineas needed, that helped Phineas's understanding. And yes, it's really cool that we can read about this now. And wow, he had this amazing dream where he saw his children that had passed away with his wife, and how incredible and powerful and testimony building that was for him. But one thing that I tend to think about is that this was incredibly important for Phineas's personal journey. Whether this is pure doctrine or not, I think is debatable. I think we need to turn to scriptures and and revelations from prophets for stuff like that. But it just makes me think how important that experience was for Phineas, to see his children and to learn, that for him, that was a testimony building experience, that they needed to go eat from this tree and then they were perfected.
Yeah.
And I just think that's really interesting. And I see that throughout when Phineas like talks about these dreams that he's had. Like, it was several chapters ago. Actually, I am trying to think if it was while he was still living in Michigan, he had a dream that he took 2 more wives. And in his dream, he was okay with it. And he woke up, he was like, whoa, what? Where that was important later on in his life, So just
I think
things
it
like
was.
that.
I think it was before or at least by the time he was almost to Nauvoo. I think that's when he got it, because that's when he met William Smith and some others that were trying to convince him to not join with the saints.
You're right.
And so that's when he prayed, and that's when he had that vision.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you're right. It calmed his mind at that moment, and it had a future meaning for him. And so, maybe this thing about the children, losing a lot of children like that, maybe this spoke some comfort to him or his family for some reason,
Yeah. And I really
like
his
go ahead.
No, sorry. I was just going to say, I like the testimony he writes kind of at the end of all of this, where he says, be faithful to God in your covenants, and he will not hide from you the rich treasures of heaven. Ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. I just think that's really, really, really cool.
And here's Annalisa having a dream where she names her baby Wolcott. Now, I was going to look up where that name comes from. I mean, did they have that name in their society?
An interesting name.
Latin, Vulcanus. I mean, wow, that's a name.
That's
Means to flash. Possibly related to fulgare, meaning to flash. Free Latin. Vulcan is the god of fire in Roman mythology. Yeah, that was, maybe he was a flash in the pan. He didn't live long. I don't know. That was an interesting one.
Yeah.
Now in there too, right around there, I think I wrote it. Oh, did I know? He mentions, I asked Annalisa to keep a daily journal.
Yes. That was shortly after he talked to Brigham.
Yes. Allison and I are working on publishing her journal, the one journal we have from her, and it's the last 2 years of her life. And that is all. And the person who had that journal, they wrote in the back of the journal, I got this from this person who had both of her journals. They mentioned 2, and we only have 1. So I'm dying to know where that is. And apparently she kept others, and I'm dying to know, because this one, it's been very fun and interesting, but it's just the last 2 years of her life. Her daughter, Harriet, lived where she is living in Garden City at the end of her life, and she's the postmaster. Her house burns down, and she even mentions with many of mother and father's papers and writings.
Oh.
So I'm guessing some of this went, and I know when we've talked about this before, when Phineas, at the end of his life, he died, and his children there in Wyoming have a bonfire and throw in And someone grabbed this manuscript and was like, oh, maybe I'll save this. So, yeah, where did those go? Well,
Mm.
I don't know if anybody finds them. So the tithing house, I'm looking at this page with the tithing house. This was interesting to me that you brought your extra food and your tithing offerings and your eggs and your chickens and all to this tithing house. And in Kirtland, they have the bishop's storehouse or tithing house. They seem to give it to the poor. And we don't know quite how it was used, how they did that. And today, our church has the bishop's storehouse that if you're poor or you're stuck, you go to your bishop and he can give you goods out of it, literally food, or sometimes just cold hard cash. So it's like desperation today to, really poor people to go to your bishop, or really stuck in a situation, you go to your bishop, talk about it, he can give you food. But I noticed in the Goshen book that we published, and he talks about it here, the tithing office then, everybody brought their stuff. They used it like a mercantile, more like a bank. It was more like a bank. You put in your tithing, and then you wrote each other checks to pay each other from the tithing office. Like, I'll hire you to pay me, and you'll go get your pay out of the tithing office. I noticed that in the Goshen book too. And he talks about it here, writing notes on the tithing office.
Interesting.
Yeah, labor. Oh, this little bit on page 101 under the tithing house has someone else mentioning this. Tithing houses were built to manage and redistribute any accumulated surplus for the collective good, playing a major role in the economic life of each community. Settlers relied on it to barter for the necessities they lacked. Someone needed grain, they deposited a chicken, or if they needed eggs. So it was not just, oh, I'm so desperate, I need something, but I've got too many eggs, I'll barter. Like the store. Labor was for by trading through the tithing house. So
Wow.
that's interesting. Yeah, it wasn't just to, help the poor, when literally we are all desperately poor here. Poor Phineas is living on potatoes and flour, but that was part of their economic community, their kind of communal living, but still like, I write you this note, you get paid out of the tithing house.
Mm-hmm.
I think a history, if anybody kept records there at the tithing house, would be really interesting to see how things came and went. Was it all pretty easily? Well, we got plenty of wood here. Or was there a run on it? And when eggs come in, they're gone in a second. That sort of thing. Interesting to tap into the health of a community.
Yeah, that is very interesting and very good. I'm trying to think of a good word for it. Very, like, you don't see that often because you can see people taking advantage of a system like that. And maybe some people did. I'm sure some people did. But very, very interesting.
Kind of like the waterworks when they mentioned, this was so different than in the East, where you got water rights if you live near water. If your property is on that stream, you get it. If it doesn't, too bad for you, because you could go a couple streams over, but you had so much water. But here they couldn't do that, so they had to set up a new system. And this was kind of a new economics, the communal living that was so popular in the 1800s, but that living as a community, very interesting new. And it really accelerated the growth of the West. So, good job, Brigham. So that people could come, and this is how they didn't die doing it, Lots of people could share efficiently.
One thing I wanted to discuss and get your guys' thoughts and opinions on it. And one thing that I found very interesting, I know we're kind of flip-flopping back and forth, but kind of talking about Phineas's two wives, Amanda and Catherine, or I guess two other besides Anne. I was reading in I think this was the second chapter. Yes, page 117. Where he talks about when they got sealed in the endowment house. And I thought this verbiage was very interesting. And part of me thought, maybe this is because he was writing about this later in life. But then I thought earlier there was a spot where he's like this, now he's writing in real time. sort of thing. So anyway, I just thought this verbiage was interesting. I'm on page 117, second to last paragraph. It says, Friday the 28th day of March, by their own free will and choice, my 3 wives went to the endowment house where they were sealed over the altar. Each one had previously had the privilege of leaving me if she chose, as it would be far better to do so before the Sodom ordinance was performed than wait to and become alienated and want divorce after. That makes sense. Hey, let's be married for a little bit, and then if so, you can leave. You all have the free liberty to leave. And it's better to do that before we get sealed because after is a little more complicated. And so I just thought that was interesting, his verbiage. He included by their own free will and choice. I did not force them to do this, even though they were really young. They all could leave me afterwards, and some of them did for a little bit. But ultimately, this is what they wanted. They wanted it, period, underline. I just thought that was, I want to make it very clear. I just thought that was very interesting verbiage. And so part of me has thought, oh, maybe he was writing this from writing about his past. Maybe the persecution was getting intense. He's like, I need to make this very clear in my journal. But then I couldn't remember if he was writing this in real time or not. And so I just wanted to get your guys' thoughts and opinions on that because it was very interesting how he worded that.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting. It was nice to read these 2 chapters back to back because in the first chapter is when they get married. And it does mention in the little sidebar on page 99 that they were sealed. Now, they didn't have this endowment house yet, I believe.
Right.
And then it said they were sealed again in 1856, which is what Anne just read. So it sounded like there was some kind of a sealing.
Right.
Yeah, there was some kind of a sealing ceremony. Now, they didn't have temples where sealings are performed today, and they didn't have this endowment house. So I was wondering, maybe it was kind of, maybe people got sealed again if they were sealed, but it was outside of a temple and an endowment house. Maybe they were all sealed again. But maybe it was like Phineas was saying, hey, I know first we're in a lot of trouble. Like things are probably really hard. Like financially, you're starving. Maybe they were still having some, problems. I mean, we know Catherine did eventually get divorced from him. We know Amanda Pauly struggled with it at the beginning. Maybe this was just going to say, hey, before we kind of renew this and get sealed again,
Make it for real.
yeah, not it sounded like they were sealed before,
yeah.
or at least they called it that. But to kind of say like, just so you know, so yeah, anyway, maybe it's not to leave before it's legit, but it's just like you always have like an out. Like, yeah, like you were saying, women were kind of given this, if you want a divorce, it's granted to you. So maybe that's what he was saying there.
Mm-hmm. That was interesting. I didn't notice that little sidebar before. And it makes me think because it says he was sealed to Annalisa, and then later he was sealed to Amanda and Catherine, and then sealed again to all 3 in the endowment house. I wonder, and maybe I don't have the histories and all the dates in my head. Mom, Marcia, I'm sure you do a little bit more than I do, but I know at the time, at least in Nauvoo times, and I wonder if this kind of carried on into when they settled Utah, that there was sealing for time, like basically just you're married on earth thing. And then there was a sealing for all eternity, time and all eternity. And so I wonder if, because it's interesting that they say they were sealed and then they were sealed again. So I wonder if it was, because you needed to do it in an official temple or endowment house, that's why you're doing it again. Or if they were only sealed or married for time and not eternity. Anyway.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's interesting.
There were not sealings just for time. You're married.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Married.
Like a civil marriage. And then you could go to the temple and be sealed. So it is curious that it does seem like they were sealed twice. Those 2 wives. Now, the plural wives would not have had a civil marriage ceremony that is at least recorded. And I'm doing a project now that's complicating things a lot because there are no records of those marriages, because you got not as early as they, but you get prosecuted for being polygamous. So you was like, don't write it. So there wouldn't have been necessarily a civil ceremony. So them going that in 1853 was their wedding. And it doesn't sound like there was a house, so it doesn't say where it was done. just said it was sealed by Ezra T. Benson. So the idea that you're taking plural marriages right off is for a sealing. You don't take
I see.
just for fun.
No, yeah.
So I think that was a sealing. And then, yeah, why he felt he needed to go again. I have not noticed. Of course, the records I've dug into are the Endowment House records. So where she got that record of the sealing done on 18th December of 1853, because where was that done? So where I'd be curious to look up that
Yeah.
collections film, because where is it done? I know they were done sometimes on mountains, sometimes in other houses. They were done and apparently recorded. So I
Mhm.
don't know if there was a feeling like we got to go back. Now there's Endowment House, and that was a prototype temple. It wasn't meant to be permanent. When the temple
Mhm.
was built, they stopped doing them at the Endowment House. No, you got to go all the way to the temple. So, yeah, I don't know why they had two,
It's
but
interesting.
3 years later, so he was still married to Catherine at that time, and they went to get resealed. Yeah, I don't know why.
Mhm. Because she according to Catherine's little blurb about her life here, well, she got sealed again they all got sealed in the endowment house in 56, and then in 57 she divorced him. And
Yeah.
so just a year later, then she stayed in Payson and blah blah blah. And so
They did rebaptisms then a lot. And it was sort of a renewal, like we did it for health. If you're sick, let's go baptize you in the water that's probably causing your sickness. But they did it for faith, that to have that faith. And they just regularly did these rebaptisms. So it might have been you moved to a new community. It's like we're re-upping, just this. So maybe it was that sort of thing. They were finishing up in Salt Lake, gonna move on. So maybe it was like, look, women, are we in this together? Are we really? Let's recommit. Maybe it was something like that. But
yeah.
I don't read about that being done a lot like it was rebaptism. So I don't know
Mhm.
if it was. But it might have been that the first ones were marriages. I'm going to marry these two. And so they went somewhere and got sealed.
Mhm.
And then Anna Liza,
Yeah, it also made me think, because yeah, you get sealed to your husband, second wife gets sealed to the did they all need to be together at one point? I don't know how plural
yeah,
marriage sealings work, if
I
I don't
don't
know.
believe you did. And Anna
Okay.
Liza, I'm curious. First, it says endowment and sealing in 1851. So that might have been Anna Liza and Phineas being sealed themselves.
Mhm.
He gets sealed to the other two. Yes. Then did they do it to redo with all three? I don't think you have to. So I wouldn't
Mm.
guess that's the reason they're doing it. But maybe they felt like, let's now all go as maybe some family solidity
Yeah.
didn't take. Catherine, I have lots of thoughts about Catherine's issues. We'll get to that down the road. About next time what she's going through. But
Yeah.
besides young and family, yeah, Jennifer.
I want to point this out because after reading these chapters and every interaction this man has with other men doesn't go well. He never walks away with money. His family
Yeah.
worse and worse conditions. But on page 121, it now seems as if nearly every friend that I ever had has shook me off. And I realized that in God was my only trust, and all men were like myself, cold, changeable, universally governed by interest or circumstance. That's a
Ooh.
stat.
Yeah.
It's just like that he was able to verbalize it like that is a very interesting concept for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought a lot about like Phineas seemed to have like this black and white thinking a lot of the times. I thought like reading it. And he has right before he says that quote, it's when he's having this issue of John Pack, who seemed to be taking advantage of the members, and he's looking to maybe get like disfellowshipped from the church or he was in the 70, which is like a high position in the church. And he kind of went back and forth on whether he should like not like approve, the disfellowship or not approve it, and back and forth. And then he comes to this conclusion that you just said. And it's interesting that he said men were like myself, cold, changeable, universally governed by interests or circumstances. So I think he like realizes that, and I think it kind of shows that maybe this black and white thinking was maybe changing right here, because he also realized that Ed's like myself, like he always tried to do what's right, but then he also like, I need to feed my family. He kind of learned that he needed to be a little selfish. And he kind of realized that everyone else was also a little selfish because they needed to take care of themselves. And also like people being changeable, where lots of people's opinions were changing. Brigham seemed to say, go, stay, things were, his opinions seemed to be changing. Brother John Pack, and I think it was Brother Kimball who gave him advice about what to do about him. That opinion seemed to change. So I think he came to like this realization of, and I think it is, like you said, Jennifer, like a really like growing moment of realizing that first that he is like that, everyone else is like that. And I think like changeable is a really good like word there, that like people like repent, change for the better, change for the worse, that people are kind of inherently selfish. And anyway, so I thought it was a really, yeah, that was an interesting thing that he said.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's back to my autism idea. And black and white and rigid, maybe that's really unsettling for him to see. Wait, you're not consistent.
Hmm.
I'm trying to be so consistent here. And I see these people. He calls Amanda Polly unsteady. That's his word for her. And
Mm-hmm.
what's a 17-year-old girl? Yeah. You know? Yeah, it seems like, oh my gosh, girl, be steady already so I can predict you. And to a person with autism, that's really, children often gravitate toward hanging out with adults because they're more steady. These kids, they're like, I can't figure them out, but adults, so kids tend to do that. So I wonder, yeah, that feeds into my little autism theory a little bit. Just that he's trying to figure out people and realize that I think this is kind of maturing and growing, like you said, Jennifer, to kind of realize nobody else has your interest in mind. I mean, yeah, we're all a community and we are taking some steps. We talk big about let's all be there for each other. But really, at the end of the day, you gotta take care of yourself. Not in a horrible, selfish way. I'm giving my tithing, whatever, but then nobody else is gonna make sure I survive.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was his realization that, at the end of the day, he still wants to grow his fruit and I want clean water, and we can't all have all of that. We gotta fight for our little piece of, yeah, kind of maybe forming some nuanced thinking and some flexibility or something. Phineas.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
now,
In that section though, some of the men, and I respect Brigham Young, don't get me wrong, but it seemed like some of the men who had a little power, and this one, that elder or brother Pack or whatever, he says like, your deeds cannot be chronicled. I'm famous and you're not, and whatever. Almost, it's like a little power, a little leadership, and they got a little bit arrogant.
yeah,
know.
my
Mhm.
fruit trees are worth way more than theirs. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
such a communal spirit going on there.
But it's such a
Mhm.
hard thing as a human being. We do tend to do that, that's a little bit of a selfish, I'm better than you type of an attitude. And these guys were, trying to build up a whole church and a whole community and all this stuff. And they didn't have, like today we have background. And I've heard someone talk about, the members that join the church in these foreign countries, that sometimes it's not like what we would expect. Like one of the men was, I think he was one of my institute students that he had served on one of the islands, and how it was like going there, and they're in the water swimming and all these things just that the missionaries aren't supposed to do, but it's the mission president's from the area, and they're just not mature yet. And at this time, the people in the gospel were not mature, and they had a lot of growing to do. And I think I really feel it when I read Phineas's journal, is this church had a lot of growing to do.
Mhm.
Yeah. everybody has to figure it out. And you're doing it while you're hangry, while you are literally hungry and nothing's working out well, and you're not at your best. Like that. Yeah.
Mhm. I would
Very
not
good.
want to be in Brigham Young's shoes for a day. It just seems like as much as Phineas talks about him and counsels with him, I think how many other people were talking to him, help me with this, help me with that. Oh, also, but you're also running the church and you're also dealing with go settle these places and also, oh no, the Indians, and also like that is a lot for one person to be the one that everyone turns to. Well, I'll just go take it to Brigham Young. Well, then why don't you? You know?
Yeah.
It's just a lot. And he was human and all the saints were human. And like you said, had a lot of growing up to do, a lot of learning to do, a lot of unique problems.
Yeah. Now I'm wondering if Annalisa was keeping a near daily journal for him, if he used that to write this from later when he finally, I think he wrote it in, well, I think it was like 56. Well, now I'm curious what's going to be written in the next, because he has such a daily thing going. The third, I'm looking at this page 12, 13, 20. Like he must have had some notes if he's looking back on all this.
Mhm.
I'm just, yeah, curious about that.
Or he's got a great memory.
On Tuesday, that would be like an autistic person too. Like, it was a Tuesday and we went.
It was raining
Yeah.
and my shoe was untied.
All right, good stuff. So someday when we have a reunion in Salt Lake, and I'm hoping maybe it could be in 2 years, but we'll see. I am hoping to get us an exclusive tour of the Beehive House and Lion House because he built them. And I want to take parts of this journal to a historian and say, you don't need to get into details, but show us the windows. Show us maybe what
Tell me about the doors.
Yes, these beams that the joists or whatever. Do a little behind the scenes, especially for us tour. I'm gonna
That would
work.
be cool.
They have been renovated. They're being renovated right now, and they'll be done next summer, I've heard. And so they
They
should
better not
of talking about them.
they better not change the doors and the windows.
Original of these
The windows
joists.
you just threw out. Those were our ancestors.
I know.
I'm
That
sure
would
they won't.
be awesome. Yeah. All right. So what are we reading next time?
For next week, we're reading just the next one chapter, which is June 1856 to April 1857 in Payson, Utah.
That's where I
This is
live.
right before Goshen. Yeah,
It
that's
is
right.
right before Goshen. Yeah.
And where's or what's the date? Are we skipping December or not?
I think
Oh, it'll be the first Saturday in December, so that's December 7th. So we're not skipping December. We will
We'll
skip January because it's close to like New Year's and stuff. But so we'll do it December 7th, 10 a.m. Utah time.
awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds
Tell
good.
your friends they can start now, even though they've missed the first 100 pages. Start now with us.
My daughter, and she was kind of interested, but she's the one that's having the birthday party today, so I didn't send her the link because I figured she wouldn't be able to do it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope people don't feel like, oh, I haven't been going and just start now.
yeah, no, I told her just start where we are, and so hopefully she'll do that.
Yeah. I've read the beginning of his book several times. This middle part, not as much. And like halfway through to the end, I didn't even read it while we were editing it and publishing it, I must admit. I handed out chapters to other people to read, and I haven't even read the end. So it's going to be like, well,
You don't know how it ends.
I don't know.
You guys are fun.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah. See you in December.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Thanks.
Bye.